Thank you. Oh, my goodness. Thank you. That's very kind. Well, good night. I'm not going to do better than that. I really am very, very honored and grateful to have an opportunity to speak about what I'm going to share with you today. I don't often get the opportunity to do this for the length of time I'm going to get a chance to do it. And we prepared a slide program and some videos. I hope it works. We've never done it before, so you'll bear with us. And I have to say that I always get a little nervous speaking in the mornings at breakfast things, because the very first time I ever went out and spoke was a morning thing, and it was such a disaster that it scarred me for the rest of my life. I was a young sports writer in the South Florida area, and I had never been asked to speak to anybody for any reason whatsoever. And out of the blue, I got invited to speak to a breakfast meeting for a lodge. It was like an elk or a moose, or I don't know, something with antlers. And they invited me to speak, and having never, been asked to speak before, I did what most of you probably would have done. I typed up this big speech ahead of time. And I showed up to this breakfast meeting in South Florida, and as you know, South Florida has a pretty good elderly population. And I walked into the room and was the youngest person there by 97 years. And I proceeded to do what they tell you to never do in Speaking 101. I read that speech with my head down the entire time. And when I looked up to a room full of sleeping people, I basically said, okay, that's it. Are there any questions? Nothing. Are there any comments? Nothing. So I sat down to this, that kind of polite applause, and they were clearing the plates away, and I was feeling like a complete failure, and this one older gentleman came up to me, and he put his arm around me, and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" So I was just happy to have anybody talking to me, and I said, "Sure," and he said, "Are you going to eat that Danish?" So now whenever I show up at a breakfast meeting or anything, and I see Danish, and but even that's not going to deter me, because I am very determined to share with you what I want to share with you today. It is a story that is extremely meaningful to me. I'm going to talk about Haiti. This is a country that perhaps many of you aren't even that familiar with, but the most important thing to know about it, besides that it's the second poorest country in the world and the poorest country on this side of the world, is that it is right off of our shores. It takes an hour and 20 minutes to get there from Florida. It's about 700 miles. It is our neighbor, and yet you would never know it from what's going on there or the way that people are treated there. Now, I want to show you a photo of my family. This is not a common family. As you can see, many of them don't look like me. They don't have my DNA, but they are my children. There are 60 children at the Have Faith Haiti Orphanage, 40 staff members, 13 more here in college in America. And I want to share with you the story of how this unlikely group became my family. Now, to really tell you the whole story and to understand it, I need to go back about 27 years to 1995. I was a sports writer here in Detroit, as you probably know, and I happened to be flipping the remote control on the television one night and came upon the Nightline program and did a double take, because there on the screen was a man who I had known since I had been in college, but he was white-haired now and thin and sickly. His name was Maurice Schwartz. He was a favorite college professor of mine, and I had not seen him in 16 years. And suddenly he was on the television with Ted Koppel talking about what it was like to die from Lou Gehrig's disease. Now, I have to say, at that point in my life, at age 37, I was not particularly charity-oriented. I was not particularly involved with community. I was mostly involved with myself. I was mostly involved in my own ambition and my own career and trying to make as much of myself as I could. When I saw Maury on the TV screen, I realized that 16 years had gone by and I hadn't even seen him. And he and I had been so close in college. I had taken every class he ever offered. I majored in sociology because of him. He was more like an uncle to me than a teacher. And now I had been so involved in my career for 16 years that I hadn't even called him. And now here he was dying from a terrible disease. So I vowed that I would call him up, one phone call, that's all it was going to be, just to say hello. I dialed his number. When I was in college, I used to call Maury Coach. It was a sports affectation, I guess. Hi, Coach. How you doing, Coach? I had long since forgotten that. When I called his number, a nurse answered. She handed him the phone. I heard him say hello, and I still remember exactly what I said. I said, "Hello, Professor Schwartz. My name is Mitch Albom. I was a student of yours in the 70s. I don't know if you remember me." And the first thing he said to me after 16 years, "How come you didn't call me Coach?" Needless to say, by the end of the conversation, I was coming to visit him. Guilt is a very powerful motivator. Well, I went to visit him, planning to see him once, but I was so taken with how he was dealing with his dying and how everything that was important to him as he was dying was all things that weren't important to me. And I began to go back the next Tuesday, and the next Tuesday, and the next Tuesday, and what turned out to be all the Tuesdays that Maury had left in his life, to try to get the answer to the question, what do we know when we're really looking death in the face that puts our life into perspective? And wouldn't it be great to have that perspective now when we're young enough and healthy enough to do something about it? And every week, Maury was able to say to me, "This matters, this doesn't matter. You think this matters, but when you get to where I am, it's not going to matter." And I learned a tremendous amount of lessons every one of those Tuesdays about what was and wasn't really important in life. And I ended up writing a small book to pay his medical bills called Tuesdays with Maury. The only reason it was ever written was to pay his bills. Ended up becoming the best-selling memoir of all time. But more important than that, it changed my perspective. There was a visit, one in particular, in which I realized that a lot of people had been coming in and out to visit Maury while he was dying. And many of them would follow the same pattern. They would bring photos of their kids. They'd bring stories to tell. They'd want to cheer him up, cheer him up because he's dying. Don't say anything negative, cheer him up. And they would go into the room where he lay, unable to move, in a wheelchair, needing to have his head turned from side to side just to see people. And they would go into this room and the door would close and they'd come out an hour later in tears. But they would be crying about their love life, their divorce, their problem, their job. And they'd say, "I don't know what happened. I went in to try to cheer him up, but after a couple of minutes, he started asking me questions. I started answering. They started really asking me questions. I really started answering. The next thing I know, I'm crying. I wanted to try to cheer him up, but he ended up cheering me up. And I watched this happen so many times that finally I went into Maury and I said, "I don't get it. If ever anyone had finally earned the right to say, 'Let's not talk about your problems, let's talk about my problems,' it would be you. You're dying. Why don't you take advantage of the sympathy?" And he looked at me as if I had just stepped off a spaceship, and he said, "Mitch, why would I ever take from people like that? Taking just makes me feel like I'm dying. Giving makes me feel like I'm living. Giving makes me feel like I'm living." It is a profound little sentence. It also rhymes, so it's easy to remember. Giving makes me feel like I'm living. And I never forgot that. And I said to myself, if he's dying and what makes him feel vital and here is helping other people, then maybe that's what you should start to do in your own life. And with some nudges from Maury, I started my first charity in 1995 right here in Detroit, or there in Detroit. I keep forgetting I'm in Windsor. And that blossomed and grew when I started more and more. We created something called Say Detroit, which now runs 9 different operations in Detroit. It's a very, very big charity and does a lot of good. And I began to see that Maury was right. Giving is living. And the more I got involved in charitable work, the more alive I felt, the more vital I felt, the more important I felt, and the more satisfied I felt. So how does that bring us to Haiti? Well, On January 9th, 2010, at around 4:45 in the afternoon, the earth in Haiti began to shake. It was a massive, massive earthquake, lasted less than a minute, and yet changed Haiti forever. A 7.9 earthquake that destroyed in 45 seconds 3% of Haiti's population killed. 10% of Haiti's population left homeless. Now, can you imagine 3%? 3% of America's population would be about 10 million people dead like that. Can you imagine 10% of America's population, or 30+ million people, suddenly homeless? Well, that's the situation that Haiti found itself in. I read about it like most of you probably did. And then a pastor came to me on my radio program and said that he had an orphanage down in Haiti and he thought it had been destroyed in the earthquake. He couldn't get any phone calls through. And he was afraid that all the kids were dead. And somehow this idea of children being buried under rubble somewhere, I couldn't get it out of my head. And so with the help of Carl Levin, who was our senator, who was on the Armed Forces Committee, he was able to get us a window of 10 minutes to fly into Haiti with a small private plane just 2 weeks after the earthquake. We had 10 minutes from leaving Pontiac to make it to Haiti within a 10-minute window, or else we'd have to turn around and come back. And we landed in Haiti, and I started to see some of the images that you just saw in those pictures. And it was devastating, because an already poor nation was now defeated. When I say a poor nation, let me give you a little context. 60+% of Haitians are unemployed. 60% of them live on $2.50 a day or less. 30% of the country, 1 out of every 3 people, is considered starving. 50% of the country, half of the entire country, does not have access to clean water. 60% of the country can't read. Only half the population ever even gets to go to school, and most of them don't get beyond the 6th grade. Less than 1% of the population ever goes to college. The average life expectancy, while close to 80 years in this country, is 62 years in Haiti. Right off of our shores, our neighbor. Well, when I got to the orphanage, thank goodness it was not destroyed. A place across the street had been destroyed, but it was overrun. People had come there and jumped the walls figuring, well, it's an orphanage, they're going to get food, and everybody was looking for food. There were bodies everywhere, strewn everywhere, sleeping on the ground, and people mobbing me as soon as I came in. Do you have water? Do you have food? Do you have anything to eat? I saw people and kids with nothing to do, just sitting in the dirt, waiting for somebody to come help them. The conditions of the orphanage were barren, to say the least. They were using holes in the ground as toilets. At night, they would take a rock and go out with a flashlight if they had to use the bathroom, and they would take the rock and bang it on other rocks so that the rats would run away, so that they wouldn't get bit on the rear end when they were squatting to use the holes in the ground for toilets. And then when they were finished, they would use the rocks for toilet paper, because there wasn't any toilet paper. The rooms, the conditions of the rooms that the kids were sleeping in were unacceptable on anybody's standards. And we tried to help while we were down there in that first trip. And we saw that the one toilet that they had was so clogged up because they had a septic field that had never been cleaned. And so we tried to hire someone to clean the septic field. And to my great surprise, we found somebody. They sent 3 people over at night, came about 7 o'clock at night when it started to cool off. They walked out to the area of where the septic field was and took off all their clothes except their underwear. They were smoking cigarettes, I'll never forget, and they were still smoking the cigarettes while they got undressed. And then they put the cigarette down on a block and jumped into the hole and cleaned out the septic field for 8 hours by hand. And when they were finished, they asked to be paid, and I said, how much do I have to pay them? $10 for 3 guys. Anybody ever complains about their job wants to keep that one in mind. Well, I came back here to Detroit, and I wrote about what I had seen. And I said, we have to try to help. And fortunately, because Detroiters and Canadians are the kind of people that help, we were able to gather up a crew of people, plumbers, roofers, contractors, electricians, and they called themselves the Detroit Muscle Crew. There were 23 of them, and we came down to Haiti, and we began to make a difference. We began to build things. We began to build the first actual facilities that they had. We were able to take old toilets that I think you can see some of them right now on the roof trying to build different tops, and we were able to take some of the old toilets, which you'll see coming up here, that looked pretty shoddy, like that, and turn them into usable toilets with real plumbing. We were able to take the beds, which consisted of just foam rubber mattresses on the ground, and turn them into bedrooms with real bunk beds. We built the first showers that the kids had ever seen. It was a remarkable sight. The kids had never taken a shower in their lives. Until that moment, a shower consisted of putting water in a red bucket and dumping it over your head. And when we built these showers and put them in, the kids walked under it. They didn't know, they looked up like what was supposed to happen. When the water came out, they were shocked. And then they jumped in and they started dancing and singing in the showers because they felt that this was some kind of gift from God. We painted the chapel and created a place where the kids could pray. And as we continued to go down there, month after month, I noticed that we were making all these big improvements, but the kids themselves were still starving. There was no food, there was no real activities. So I said to this pastor who was in his mid-80s, what's going on? I don't understand. We're putting all this time and effort in, and yet it doesn't look like things are getting better. And that's when he said to me, well, to be honest, I'm 84 years old. I haven't had any money to run this place for years. And in one of those moments that I guess harken back to Maury, or is just my own stupidity of blurting things out, I said, well, I could probably run this place if you want me to. I run some charities in Detroit. How hard could it be? And he basically said, thank you, Jesus, hallelujah, here it is. And I have been running it ever since. We never saw him again. I have been there every single month since January of 2010, without exception. One of the reasons that I do that is because I noticed when we would go down there that every time we would get there, the first thing the kids would say to me when they saw me was, when are you leaving? And I would always say, why are you asking when am I leaving? I just got here. But the more time I spent, the more I began to realize that these children who were abandoned, remember, at least once to be put into this orphanage, always measured how much love they should give based on how long you were going to stay. And if they thought that you were going to be there and then be gone, they would keep an arm's length distance. But if they knew you were coming back, they would give themselves fully. And so I said, I'll be here every single month. And whenever they would say, when are you coming back? I would say, well, what month is it? February. Well, what's next month? March. Well, then I'll be here in March, right? And they would smile. And I knew that, okay, we had settled this. So I go every month so that they know I'm going to be there every month and operate the place. And as we began to go and improve things and admit new children, and I will tell you that for every one child that we take, we have to say no to at least 10. We're at the point where we can't take anybody who has 2 parents. We can't take anybody who has a parent who's working. We can't take anybody who has a house or a structure over their head. Not because they're not needy or so poor that they need our help, but because we simply couldn't fit that many children. So most of our children have no parents, no place to live. In many cases, they don't even have names or birth certificates when they come to us, and we have to invent some of them. And yet, throughout this, the kids began to get better. They began to eat they began to bathe, they began to learn. And as always, they always had ways to have fun, even if they invented them. Take a look at this video. Every one of the words that they said in that little chant was a beverage. If you could hear it, there was orange, cola, all beverages that they never have drank in their life. Our biggest accomplishment, I believe, was when we established a school. After about a year and a half there, we built it from scratch and we opened it. And that school is now the absolute gem of our organization. We teach 4 hours in English and 4 hours in French every single day. We have 16 teachers for 60 kids, so the ratio is about 4 kids per teacher, which makes the learning that much more intense. And our kids learn how to read and speak 3 languages, usually by the time they're 5 years old. Here is one of our kids learning how to read his first book.
But with all the things that you can do, the circus is the place for you. Yes, this is where I want to be. The circus is the place for me. And go get it.
That little one there will now graduate from high school next year. To give you an example of our kids, I want to focus on 3 children briefly and tell you their stories. The first one was a little boy who was brought to us in the middle of the night, asleep. His mother was carrying him, or at least we thought it was his mother, and she walked into our orphanage with him, and she told us a story. She said that she had been visiting a friend at a hospital, and when she left the hospital, she was walking home, and there was a wooded area, and she heard a baby crying in the woods. So she went in, and she found the 6-week-old infant who had been left under a tree to die, abandoned by whoever couldn't take care of him. So she picked him up, and she took him to a police station. And when she brought him into the police station, the police said to her, "What'd you pick him up for? Now we have to do paperwork. Why didn't you just leave him where he was?" This is the attitude towards life. So she grabbed him from the police station and ran home with him. She tried to raise him, but she was very young, and she was very inexperienced. And when he was 1 year old, he was on a tabletop, and apparently he jumped off the table thinking he could fly, and landed and smashed his head open and had to have emergency brain surgery. The reason she brought him to us in the middle of the night was that she didn't want us to see that he couldn't walk. We woke him up, and he wouldn't speak. And I was saying to myself, how can we take a child who doesn't even speak? How can we communicate with him? And she kept saying, he talks, he's just not talking now. And so one of our staff members got a great idea. She took 2 puppets and put one on each of her hand, and she sat behind him, and she put the puppets in front of him and started talking to him with puppets. And he began to speak. And we asked him to stand up, and we watched him walk, and his arm and his leg were kind of up. And basically, he was a stroke victim. We asked what his birthday was. She didn't know. We asked what his name was. She had assigned him a name. Well, we took that little boy in, And he is now the brightest ray of sunshine that you would ever want to meet. His name is Knox, and he is 13 years old. He comes here to America every 4 months and gets therapy thanks to some really good people at Beaumont. His arm now is down, his leg is down. He can walk, he can play soccer, he learns, he goes to school. He doesn't know where he came from. He's never heard the story I just told you. All he knows is that we're his family, and he's loved, and he loves people back. A second child. We get a phone call from a woman who says, we have a child here at a malnutrition center. Nobody has come for him in over a year. We don't know where he comes from. We don't know his background. Would you take him? So we go and meet this child, and we find out that before he was at the malnutrition center, he was at a tuberculosis center because somebody, when he was 2 years old, noticed that he was coughing and thought he had tuberculosis, so they brought him to the tuberculosis center out in the provinces, and they never came back for him. They left him there for a year. He lived in the hallways of a tuberculosis center for a year. He didn't have tuberculosis, but he lived at the tuberculosis center for a year and became so emaciated that he was down to, I think he was about 3 years old, he was down to about 10 pounds and was taken to a malnutrition center. If you don't believe me, then take a look at the photo and look at the image on the left. That was him when he came to us. His name is Geisen, Augustin, and that's him on the right a year later. He is now 11 years old. He's got the mind of an engineer. He does math in his head. And despite the fact that he lost a lung, which we had to have him operated on up here in Children's Hospital, had a hole in his esophagus where he couldn't swallow any food, everything was going into his lungs. Miraculously, thanks to some good help here, he was fixed up. And today, at age 11, he's thriving. Another story. Now, along the way, we try to make sure that our kids have as rich a life as they can have at our orphanage, especially now because we're kind of locked in, and I'll explain that to you in a minute. So we try to introduce programs like arts and reading programs, and of course, music. Music is a huge part of life in Haiti. It's always been a huge part of my life too. And so the joy that our kids express is probably never seen more than in music, whether it be little kids like this video here,
Go!
You may notice in the background there's some amplifiers and things like that. We have a music room, and thanks to donations from people over the years, every trip we go down, we take one instrument or one cymbal or one pair of drumsticks or whatever we can fit with us, and we eventually build the instruments up to the point that we were able to have a full music room and a wonderful professor whose name is Dennis Teeney, who used to run the jazz program over at Wayne State University and now comes with me every month to Haiti and runs our music program for free, just out of the goodness of his heart. And as a result, we've been able to create bands because, of course, if you have teenage kids, they're going to make bands, right? So we had, first the boys wanted to make a band, and we said, okay, so they made a band, and they called themselves the Hermanos Brothers, which, if you know Spanish, is brothers, brothers. And I don't know why, because they don't speak Spanish, but they decided to call themselves that. And then the girls said, well, we want to have a band, and so they called themselves Destiny 7. Don't ask me why. And on the steps of our school building, we put on little concerts for our own enjoyment, for the own staff. And I guess with my influence, they've learned a few American songs like this one here. You can watch.
Mama, no, mama,
just wanted you to hear that they do rock and roll as well. As time passed, we admitted more and more children, and every year now we bring in about 5 or 6 new children. And our young ones, when I first got there, have now grown into young men, and our young girls have now grown into young women. We take children from all over the country, all levels of poverty. I've given you some of the parameters. We found children who have been living in holes in the ground after floods or earthquakes. We found children who literally had no names or no birth certificates that we had to invent for them. There is no shortage of new children to take in. But we also get a chance to see them grow up. When I first arrived, one of the children was a sweet, shy girl named Samantha, who you'll see me, she's small enough for me to hold her in my arms. Last June, Samantha was one of our 4 high school graduates, and if you take a look, you'll see her, she's the 3rd one in. That's her now. And she just completed her first year at Hope College on a full scholarship. Our kids getting educated is the hope for Haiti. As I said, less than 1% of Haitians ever go to college. Our goal is to have every single one of our kids go to college, and every single one of them has a scholarship waiting for them thanks to a partnership that we have with a group called the MCA, Michigan College Alliance in Michigan, which is 14 schools, smaller schools, Hillsdale and Hope and Calvin and Madonna and schools like that. And so far, every one of our kids who has graduated, and we're up to 13 now, have all qualified for scholarships and are all scattered at those different schools. And if you want to get an idea, and I get goosebumps when I think about this moment, of how important and precious this is for our kids, then let me show you a little video clip of a young man named Emmanuel. He was our first kid to graduate and go to college here in America. I watched this kid for years doing his homework on his lap outside under a single light bulb, and he didn't have a desk, and so he put his paper on his knee, and he would write with a pencil, and the pencil would break through the paper sometimes, and so his homework would always have holes in it because he didn't have a flat surface to do his homework on. And when he finally got into college, we brought him to Madonna University. It was funny because they were excited to have him, and so they said, we'll meet you when he comes into his dorm. We'll meet you there. We'll help him move into the dorm. I said, okay. We drove down to Madonna. All of his possessions fit into a bag that was about this big that he just carried in his hand. That's all he owned. And we showed up there, and they were waiting with this big thing to move, the trunks that kids usually move the stuff in, the stereo equipment, all the speakers. They had this big, massive thing to put it in, and all he had was his little gym bag. And so I said, well, put your gym bag in there. So put the gym bag in, and we went up 3 floors to the dorm, and we walked into the room. It was your typical little dorm room, right? Desk, bed, furnace. And he walked in, and he saw the desk. And he put his hands on the desk. He said, do I get my own desk? And I said, of course. And he started to cry. He said, all my life, I always wanted to have my own desk. My own desk. That kid went through Madonna University for 4 years, never getting less than an A. And when he graduated, we managed to hook up Wi-Fi, which is not something we have very easily in Haiti, and got all our kids together to watch him accept his diploma, which was being live streamed. Take a look at their reaction. There aren't a lot of American kids who get that excited about their brother or sister graduating from college 1,000 miles away. But he has become a role model for our children, and what's today, May? In 2 months, in July, he begins medical school at Michigan State. Our goal is to educate a class of young Haitian people to run Haiti. Many people say, well, why don't you just let them stay in America? And I say, that's not the point. We have enough people in America. They need to make their own country better. Our goal is to one day have one of our kids become the president of that country. And when they say, oh, what privilege did you grow up in that you became president of the country? They say, I grew up in an orphanage. That's our goal for all of them. Now, I told you that I would tell you about 3 children, and I've told you about 2. The third is a little girl named Chica. Chica came to us. She was born 3 days before the earthquake. And on the 3rd day of her life, she was actually in a little cinder block structure lying on her mother's chest when the earth began to shake and the walls of her home came down. But because the roof was not attached, it was a piece of tin, it fell backwards and she and her mother were spared. Her entire structure came down around them, but they were left naked to the sky lying on a bed. And on the 3rd day of her life, Chica slept in a bed of sugarcane leaves in the dirt. And that's how she slept for the next 6 weeks of her life. She was brought to us when she was 2.5 years old, when her mother died, giving birth to a baby brother in that same rebuilt cinder block one-room structure. She died because there was no doctor present. There was no doctor present because there's never a doctor present when poor women give birth in Haiti and the provinces. There's no money, there's no insurance, there's no way to get to a hospital, so you take your chances. And something happened when she gave birth, something I'm sure that could have been taken care of in a hospital, but because there was no doctor present, she bled out and died in the same bed where the baby was born. And Chica was taken away that day and brought to our orphanage, where she lived loudly and happily for the next 2.5 years as our brashest, boldest, bossiest kid, until one day we discovered that there was something the matter. Her face was drooping. We got her to America and found out that she had a brain tumor, something called DIPG. We thought that whatever it was, the doctors would be able to take care of it, and they'd have her back in no time at the orphanage, until we found out that DIPG is a 4-letter word for death. Nobody survives it. Most children die within 4 months, rather. We were told to take her back to Haiti and just let her die there, but we said, no, you don't understand. This kid's a fighter, and if she fights, we're going to fight. And so for the next 2 years of our lives, Chica became our daughter, and we traveled around the world trying to find a cure. And while we didn't find a cure, we did find something else. We found a family. And the joy that that little girl brought us and the lessons that she taught us are immeasurable. And she didn't live 4 months or 8 months or 12 months or 16 months or 20 months, but she lived 2 years. And in those 2 years, she taught us a great amount about what love really means and about what courage really means. And one day, towards the end of her life, she couldn't walk anymore. I had to carry her from place to place. I was her transportation, which was fine by her. Chica was really good with that. Take me here, take me there, take me there. That's fine. And we were sitting at a table, coloring, and I realized that I was late for my radio show, and I popped up and I said, Chica, I gotta go. And she said, no, Mr. Mitch, stay, color. I said, Chica, I have to work. She said, Mr. Mitch, I have to play. I said, yeah, but it's not the same thing, Chica, because this is my job. And she crossed her arms and she pouted and she looked at me and she said, no, it isn't. Your job is carrying me. Well, after I got done laughing, I realized truer words were never spoken, because of course my job was to carry her. It's the best job I've ever had. And the truth is, all of our jobs is to carry our children, right? Through sickness, through health, whatever problems they have. And if you are blessed to have the means, as I have been blessed, or if some of you have been blessed, then it is our job to carry the children of the world, the poor, the sick, the abandoned, the forgotten. Those are the kids that make up our orphanage. Kids like Chica. We need to carry these children. And that need is even greater today than it has ever been. Let me bring you to today before I finish. This is Haiti today. Daily reports about gangs and violence. Some of you may have heard that the president was assassinated a few years ago. And ever since the president was assassinated, gangs have taken over basically all of Port-au-Prince and much of the country. The gangs sit on fuel until the prices go to, at one point we had to pay $50 a gallon just to get a gallon of gas. They will sit on food supplies. They will sit on things that come in from the outside of the country. They will terrorize people. They will literally walk in with guns to somebody's home, tell them to leave. It's their home now. And if they don't leave, they just shoot them dead. The amount of violence in Haiti now and daily killings is astronomical. You can get kidnapped on the street in Haiti for no reason whatsoever. And I'm not just talking about being a dignitary or a foreigner getting kidnapped. An average Haitian will literally be walking on the street and someone will come up with a gun, kidnap them, take them to a place, take their phone, start calling people who are in their phone and say, we have such and such, give us $1 million. And the people say, we don't have $1 million, give us $500,000. We don't have $500,000, give us $100,000. We don't have $100,000. They end up giving for a refrigerator, an air conditioner. But people are being kidnapped left and right and center. And now, the people have decided to start fighting back. And so some of you may have read that about 10 days ago, 13 gang members were found combing through a neighborhood by police. And as the police were rounding them up, the citizens of that neighborhood came out, stormed the police, took these 13 gang members and killed them with their bare hands, and then burned their bodies in the street to send a message to the rest of the gangs out there. Well, that happened 2 blocks from our orphanage. And from that point forward, we've been under siege. Bullets fly all day long. Our kids have to stay inside the dormitory, hidden up on the upper floor with couches and chairs pushed up against the doors, hoping that nobody comes over the wall. We can't even let our kids play outside because bullets are flying and the bullets can land even if they're not aiming at us. This is the terror that we live under now and that all of Haiti lives under on account of these gangs. And yet, I'm leaving tomorrow to go back. Why, you say? What kind of idiot are you? Why do you keep going every month? I go, and we have to go, for children like this. Less than a year ago, a woman showed up carrying a baby. Baby was 6 months old and weighed 6 pounds. The woman said, I haven't been able to feed this baby anything but sugar water. She's never had any solid food. Her name was Nadi. This is a picture of her and what she looked like when she first arrived. A picture of her 6 weeks later after we brought her to America to get on a feeding program. And now a picture of her from 2 days ago and what she looks like at 17 months and 20 pounds. The next picture. Can you get to the next picture? Rosie? There she is. That's Nadi. That's the reason that we continue to go. That's the reason we have to go, because we can't turn our back on these children. Children deserve a life. They didn't ask to be born into this country. They deserve the same modicum of happiness that we want for our own children here in Canada or here in America. They deserve to have one good day. And at our place, the Have Faith Haiti Mission, we try to make every day a good day. Here to wrap things up is a look at a typical day at our orphanage.
get ready. Here it comes, it's a light, a beautiful light. Over the horizon, into her eyes. Oh my, how beautiful. Oh my beautiful mother, she told me, son, in life you're gonna go far. If you do it right, you'll love where you are. Just know, wherever you go, you can always come home. 240,000 miles from the moon, we've come a long way to belong here, to share this view of the night, a glorious night. Over the horizon is another bright sky. Oh my, how beautiful. Oh my, irrefutable Father, he told me, son, sometimes it may seem dark, but the absence of the light is a necessary part. Just know you're never alone. You can always come back home. You can always come back. Every road is a slippery slope. There is always a hand that you can hold on to. Looking deeper through the telescope, you can see that your home's inside of you. Just know that wherever you go, no, you're never alone. You will always get back home. Get ready, get ready. 'Cause here it comes, it's a light, a beautiful light. Over the horizon, into our eyes.
So that is how I came to be part of a most unlikely family. It is a family of children, but it is the family of man. And you are part of it as well. We all are. And we need help. It's extremely expensive to run an orphanage, and now our security needs alone dominate our budget just to try to keep our kids safe. But we owe it to these children to keep them safe. We owe it to these children to give them a life and come to their aid in a time of need. And that time, ladies and gentlemen, is now. Thank you very much for listening to me and for getting to know our family at the Have Faith Haiti Orphanage. Appreciate it.